So I miss them. I miss them a lot. CDOs. Well, the major difference is what we're carving up. The French word for carve is slice. CDO 720 2028. So, in a CMO, I go to Ginnie Mae or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. We'll say Ginnie Mae because that's what they use in the test. And instead of saying that I want to buy proportionate ownership in the pool of mortgages, because if I put 25 grand into a mortgage pool and Molly puts 25 grand into that same mortgage pool, our checks would look exactly like. Boring, no priority provisions. That's the fancy way of saying that we have equal status. And so if I work in structured finance at an investment bank, what I do instead is I go to Ginnie Mae and say, listen, I want to buy the whole thing, not proportion ownership of the pool. I want to buy every mortgage in the pool, the entire pool. Investment bankers have discovered that you get more money selling it by the slice. And if you get a fancy French name, you get more. No, I'm not going to get much for snails with butter. But escargot and beurre, now we're talking, right? I have a chef friend. I said, what's the difference between a casserole and a cassoulet? He said, about $20. So the French word for slice is tranche. So when I carve up a Ginnie Mae pool into various cascading cash flows, tranches, now it's a little more exciting because now Molly and I can decide what kind of risk are we willing to take. I saw a guy being interviewed who carves up mortgages for a living, creates CMOs. And so I just carved a mortgage pool into 186 tranches, 186 cash flows, and everybody thinks they got the best slice. And why is this on your Series 7? Well, who do you think is getting the worst slice? Institutional investors or retail investor Joe Sixpacks? Typically Joe Sixpacks. These cascading cash flows are based on, again, the payout from the mortgages. And, we have the early cash flows, which are called test question plan amortization classes, PACs. And we have targeted amortization classes. Those are the later cash flows. And the test question is if Molly buys a PAC and Dean buys a TAC. Molly buys an early cash flow for the mortgage pool, a plan amortization classes. Those earlier cash flows have more predictability and test question less risk. Because we know that most people don't hold their mortgage forever. They refinance, they move and relocate and sell the house and pay off the mortgage. But there's more predictability early on. And if I buy that later cash flow, the targeted amortization class, that's going to have less predictability and more risk. Now, you asked about the distinction. There is no credit risk in a CMO because what we're carving up are Ginnie Mae's. And Ginnie Mae test question as a separate test issue has the full faith and credit of the U.S. Treasury. So we don't have any credit risk in a CMO, but we do, Molly and I, we don't have to worry about credit risk, but we do have to worry about interest rate risk. And do we have more interest rate risk or less? Well, it depends. Again, remember, in a regular Ginnie Mae pool, Molly, you and I would have interest rate risk in both directions. Interest rates go up, Molly. Nobody refinances. And now we're stuck in this lower than today return because nobody's going to refinance these mortgages. And Molly, if we were in a regular Ginnie Mae pool with proportion ownership, no priority provisions, and interest rates went down, everybody refinance and this thing would end sooner. So in a Ginnie Mae pool, one of the challenges, Molly, is it has an indeterminate maturity because we don't really know when it ends. Most debt instruments have a maturity date that is certain, like 10 years or 15 years or whatever the case may be. But in these CMOs, we don't have credit risk, but we do have interest rate risk. Trick question. Do we have more or less interest rate risk in a cascading cash flow, a tranche, from a Ginnie Mae pool than the actual Ginnie Mae pool itself? Do we have more or less interest rate risk? It depends, right? That's the whole point of carving it up, is some people now have more risk and some people have less risk. That's the whole point of carving this into cascading cash flows. Now, the second question was, how is that different from a CDO? Well, the difference is what we're carving up. In a CDO, we aren't carving up cash flows from a mortgage pool. We're carving up cash flows from other things, bonds, for example, or receivables from car loans or credit card receivables. So in a CDO, same general idea, we're carving up, creating these cascading cash flows. Maybe I could say in my if I'm buying a CDO of American Express receivables, maybe Molly wants to buy the CDO that represents the 60-day receivables, and I buy one that's 120-day receivables. We're carving it up rather than having same priority provisions. The assumption being that the American Express cardholders that are 120 days late are a greater risk, and therefore that CDO would pay me more than the early one again. The whole idea is the early ones have less risk than the later ones. And so that's the big difference. CDOs, we're carving up not mortgage securities, but we're carving up bonds. We're carving up, when I say carving, I mean creating these tranches, these cash flows, car loans, receivables, whatever the case may be. I don't think you're going to see anything on CDOs on the Series 7. I think CDOs are more the test prep vendor thing, but you're certainly going to see CMOs. And I told you the test questions already about CMOs. I'll add another one. The buyer has to sign a suitability statement. Molly has to sign something saying that she understands that she's not buying proportion ownership in a mortgage pool, but rather she understands she's buying a derivative security. She's buying a cash flow from a mortgage pool, a much different thing. So that would be our final test question. Okay, so moving on.